The secrets and scandals of the coronation, the inside story on our new king and queen, and what happens next. We've got a show with a difference for you today. Welcome to number 2 of 3 special editions of Palace Confidential. The coronation is almost upon us, and so we've asked some experts to share their knowledge of the couple about to be crowned. There's a lot of fascinating stuff coming up from Robert Hardman, Sarah Vine and Tom Bower, among others, so stick with us. Robert Hardman is a royal biographer, broadcaster and Daily Mail columnist, and I started by asking him his views on the more modern coronation we're anticipating.
It's going to be very different from 1953. I think part of the problem that has faced the king so far is that everybody is looking at this coronation in terms of the last one and saying, oh, it's not going to be as big. Well, I mean, of course it's not. The world has moved on. It's a completely different country, different expectations. That was a fantastic sort of magical almost moment of escape from all the privations of sort of post-war austerity. London was still full of bomb sites, people were on rations, and hurrah, this thing comes along, and guess what, the day it happens we conquer Everest. I mean, it couldn't get much better. No one's going to be conquering any peaks this week, and maybe they will, but I don't think it'll be quite so amazing. It's a different feel, but it is at the heart of it. It's a sort of marriage. It's really like a huge royal wedding. It's a marriage of the monarch to the people, and it's just it's something we really haven't seen. There are bits of the royal regalia that just live in the jewel house at the Tower of London that never come out except for this occasion.
Well, I hope they will come out.
They will. The whole lot will come out. I mean, it'll be bling-tastic in sort of popular parlance. I mean, but it will be an amazing, historical moment, and it's not just about putting on a show, and it's not just a sort of pageant. I mean, it's a very important political, constitutional, religious moment. I mean, these are seriously important vows. A lot of this is laid down in the laws of the country. This isn't just a nice thing to do. I mean, this is something that monarchs have to do.
It is what they have to do, and I think a lot of people will respect the idea of a slimmed down, slightly more austere ceremony, but I suspect there's probably quite a lot of minor royals disappointed to be missing out in this once-in-a-lifetime pageantry.
I mean, I think the close family will be there, but it's going to be different. I mean, every coronation is different. They all take on, they all sort of in a way are a sort of reflection of their times. I mean, George VI's coronation in 1937, that was done in a hurry because it was meant to be the coronation of his elder brother, Edward VIII. They just wanted to get it over and done with. So that one was more a sort of sense of urgency. With the Queen, it was, this has got to look brilliant, said Winston Churchill. That's why we're going to take a year and a half to get ready for it, over a year and a half.
That's an interesting leap, because I wanted to ask about how you think the conversations will have gone between the palace and the government for this coronation.
Well, it's multiple players in this thing. I mean, ultimately the government's footing the bill, so the government has a big say. I think the government's had more of a say in this one actually than in the last one. I've been through the files, the cabinet papers, Royal Archives, National Archives, looking at how the last one sort of took shape. And Churchill was involved, but he was sort of deferring to the palace on a lot of things. The big debate in the run-up to that was it going to be on TV or not?
Of course, and now, I mean, it's just without question now.
Absolutely, but back then, it began with a discussion where the Archbishop of Canterbury said this is a terrible idea, and others joined in, and Churchill joined in, but it was really, what did the Queen think? The Queen thought it was a terrible idea too, because what they were all worried about was making a mistake. That was the problem. Previous coronations had been filmed, but they'd been edited afterwards before anybody could see them. So the idea of having live TV that was a big issue. But ultimately, it became a big debate. Everybody, the government, the archbishops, the church, the Commonwealth, all sided with the Queen. The Queen didn't like it. They didn't like it. However, the press and Parliament said, "Hang on. What about the people? It's all very well for all you lot. You're in there. You can see it. We can't." So they backtracked.
Yeah.
But they still kept certain parts of that service private. So the anointing, totally private. Also, the Holy Communion, that was totally private. Now, this time is different. The anointing of the king will remain private. The anointing of the Queen is something we will see, and it's a dab. It's not a great sort of upending. No, it's certainly not a sort of a dousing. And the communion element, I think we will see. I'm confidently expecting we'll see all of that. So, but more than that, I mean, this time, the BBC will do fantastic camera work. We just know it. I mean, they've been planning the camera angles. They couldn't do that in '53 because they'd filled the Abbey up with grandstand seating to cram 8,000 people in. Yeah. So the choice of sort of shots, I mean, Westminster Abbey looked very cosy, actually, in '53, because it was very cosy. I mean, they're all sitting there like this. This time around, it's going to be the normal layout, and it'll be far more spectacular for the viewer, and probably rather less spectacular for the punter inside.
With this ceremony, it's a good opportunity for Charles and Camilla to set their stall out, essentially, as the kind of monarchs they want to be. What do you think that they will want this to say about their reign?
I think they'll want it to say that they are absolutely embracing it, that they are. It's almost been micromanaged. I mean, he's a very cultured king. He's very artistic. He's probably got the biggest, I would say, strongest connection with the arts, really, than any monarch since probably George III. So he's commissioned 12 new pieces of music. And when I say he's commissioned, I mean, obviously it's been commissioned by the Abbey authorities, but it's all done through the king. I mean, one of the reasons I think it's taken so long for a lot of stuff to be finished is that he's just got this sort of pile of things on his desk which he wants to be able to...
And he's very hands-on.
Totally, yeah. He wants to know all about it.
We've heard a lot of discussion over the years about this so-called idea of a slimmed-down monarchy. What do you think that's actually going to look like?
Well, I think it's an old idea that's been parked because it's slimmed itself down. We used to hear kind of rumblings about it back in the days when Charles didn't really talk very much about his plans because it was, he didn't because his mother was still queen. It was therefore inappropriate. But he was certainly giving thought to, how does this institution... He was wise enough to see that the sight of endless sort of hangers-on the balcony did not play well with the public. What are you going to do about that? Well, as it happens, several potential members of the royal family have sort of basically removed themselves from the scene. So yes. You've got the older cousins, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, play a big part in public life, but I mean they're now in their late 70s. You've got the Duke of Kent and his sister Princess Alexandra. They're in their 80s. They are they're moving, quietly moving away from the public scene. So you're looking now really at, as we know, King and Queen, the Waleses, Princess Anne, and the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, Edward and Sophie. That's kind of going to be it.
Well,
and you can't get it much smaller than that. As Princess Royal said in her interview the other day, she said, actually, I don't think you can do much more slimming. But when Charles was thinking about this sort of slimming down operation, that was at a time when both his parents were still active royals, when you had Prince Andrew very much on the scene, you had Harry and latterly Meghan coming through, and also I think Andrew pushing quite hard, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, to see his daughters somehow playing a role. So you were looking at a pretty substantial operation. Now that's, as I said, that has slimmed of its own accord.
And also, what will naturally happen then, fairly or unfairly, is there will be a lot of focus on the Waleses, William and Catherine on the day. Do you think that they will already be almost casting a shadow?
No, I think it's quite interesting the way that they are. I sense no appetite on their part to sort of up their profile. If anything, I think they've been quite discreet actually in recent months. I think there's a sense they're getting on with their charities, their causes. They're still very much doing the sort of the regular duties of royalty, but there hasn't been any sort of big news stuff, because I think they realise this is building up to the King's big day.
And a reminder that an updated version of Robert's book, Queen of Our Times, The Life of Elizabeth II, is out now. After we finished recording yesterday's show, Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine stuck around for a longer chat, and she started with her own personal experiences with King Charles and Queen Camilla. You've seen Charles and Camilla up close and personal, haven't
Yes,
you?
I have.
A couple
yes.
of occasions. What are they like?
I've had dinner with them at Clarence House. They are like any nice posh couple that you ever meet, in normal life. I mean, he's very considerate of her. He's a real gentleman, and she is funny and sort of warm and a little bit mischievous. He's quite an intellect. He likes to talk about current affairs, history. He's very interested in sort of science, and he's one of those. You can tell that he's a sort of voracious reader, absolutely voracious reader. I mean, I think people always take him books when they go to see him because he just loves reading. She's much more what I would call sort of just a general fun person to be with. I mean, if you sat next to her at a dinner party, she would definitely entertain you. She's very chatty and easy to get on with, very easygoing, very informal. Well, he's very formal, she's very informal.
It's just so unusual to have that time in the company, company of royals.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like you have any insight from those meetings and that time together on what kind of monarchs they will be?
I've had lots of. Yeah, I mean, I've met quite a few famous couples and people over the years, and I would say that they too get on incredibly well. They're sort of very much in march with each other, and I think that's the thing. I think they're quite yin and yangy. I think they sort of complement each other in that way that really happy couples do, and she is. I don't know. She sort of makes all of his grumpiness and his slight sort of. Because he can be a bit sort of petulant, she sort of makes it okay because she, do you remember seeing that? Remember that incident with the pen?
Oh yes, I was thinking about that very thing
where
as
he
you
sort
were
of
talking.
got a bit cross about the pen because the pen wasn't working and he was trying. And she's the person who comes along. It's almost like he's like a lion and she's the lion tamer. She just knows how to press the right buttons with him to sort of calm him down.
That's the sort of intimate, personal side of their relationship. How do you see that translating as a public-facing display?
Well, I think that's why it's so important for him that she is queen, because I don't think he could do it without her. I
get the sense that he thinks that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not an idiot. Of course he could do it without her. But what I mean to say is I don't think he would like to do it without her. I think he needs her as his counsel and his sort of rock, really. And I think, if you're in that very difficult position like the Queen was, you do need somebody who you can totally rely on at all times to be on your team, and she is always on his team. There's no question about it, because it's such an awkward situation to find yourself in, and you have to make such difficult decisions all the time. So you do really need a proper sounding board, and I think they will very much work like that. I don't think she will sort of try and muscle her way into the limelight or to the front or anything like that. I think she will just be the sort of, not the power behind the throne, but sort of almost the stabilising force behind the throne.
Now let's have a talk about the actual day. I know that you and I are both looking forward to, whether it's slimmed down or scaled up, we're looking forward to the regalia.
I know.
Fashion.
I'm all about the clothes for this day.
I am too.
Yeah. Do you remember Kate and William's wedding?
Yes.
And that was like a brilliant fashion show.
And what I remember the most is the Queen's resplendent marigold yellow.
Yeah. We are going to miss that fantastic, sort of twinkly-eyed lady in her all-in-one colours. I think that for me there'll be a real absence because she's not going to be there. There's going to be a succession of fabulous-looking women. I mean, although we were saying this earlier, there not very many of the young royals are going, so there isn't going to be that sort of glamour of the young people. But I do think that I know a few people who've been going in the frocks. Well, they've all been on a diet for the last 3 weeks because they're a bit worried about looking pudgy in their dresses. But also the frocks have been. There's been a lot of frock buying going on and hat making. I think Philip Treacy has been very, very... Is it Treacy?
I say Tracy.
Tracy.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's been very busy with his hats. There's going to be a lot of those hats.
Camilla's style, I think, is fantastic.
She's very chic.
Yes.
She is very chic.
I think her hat game is unassailable.
I mean, when she got married in 2005, she wore that exquisite, slightly sort of...
slightly Indian-y,
It was
wasn't
slightly Indian in
Yeah.
the Nehru collar,
Yeah.
which looked beautiful on her. And she always gets her colours right. She's very good at going... She does her neutrals really well, I think. She's very good
She was my favourite at Harry and Meghan's wedding in the sort of like dusty pink with the really sort of almost sugar spun looking hat.
And the hat that she had on her wedding day was unbelievably
She's
beautiful.
incredible. Yeah.
So, but she does also have a very good face for it. She has got, and she's got that lovely white sort of. I mean, I love her hair. It's that sort of. It's white blonde.
It's like a fabulous cauliflower.
It's
a
like
really expensive cauliflower.
You're like it's like spun sugar actually. It is very pretty. So yeah, her fashion sense I think has always been spot on. But the thing about Camilla, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this because now she's going to be queen, but she is actually very sexy in the flesh. She's a very charismatic.
Is Britain ready for a sexy queen
woman.
consort?
I mean, I know she's in her 70s, but when she was young, she was hot to trot. I mean, her and Princess Anne were properly, 70s sex pots. I mean, maybe we're not allowed to say that, but they were. I mean, if you look,
you might have just committed high treason, Sarah Vine.
Sorry.
On that note, we'll move on. But thank you so much today. Tom Bower is one of the most successful biographers of the modern era. Among his books are biographies of the then Prince of Wales, called Rebel Prince, The Power, Passion and Defiance of Prince Charles, and more recently a book on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex entitled Revenge, Meghan, Harry and the War Between the Windsors. I asked him to cast his mind back to the profile he built up in his book on Charles. Tom, we'll come to the newer book in just a moment, but I want to cast you back for a moment to your work on our new king. Speaking to those around him, what was your overriding impression of the man?
Well, my book about Prince Charles in 2019, I think, was very critical of him because he came across from many of the people I spoke to, and I spoke to about 100 people, as very self-indulgent, a man who was very difficult, who created controversy, who didn't listen to people who disagreed with him, and you often fire people if they didn't do what he demanded. He, of course, sold access to himself for charity, to raise money for charity, for which Fawcett is now, Michael Fawcett is now under investigation. And it was actually a pretty unpleasant picture of a man who, I will give him credit, he tried very hard and he's very thoughtful, and he pursued marvelous causes like the environment, and I think on architecture and the Prince's Trust, but it came with baggage and it came with a lot of downsides. And I think that's why in the end the book painted him as a plus and a negative.
Will the new role change him, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the book had a very, very dramatic effect on him and on those around him, because I found in the months after the book's publication, he stopped the cash for access to meals. His way of travel changed dramatically. He treated people very differently. All those who had complained that they had been fired because they said no to him, suddenly their successors found him more amenable. So I do think in the 5 years since the book's publication, there's been a huge improvement. And I think now we can have some confidence that he won't be a meddlesome king. He won't be a difficult king. I think actually much will depend on the coronation and the mood that follows. But I think that, if you're a monarchist, as I am, one must just hope that he actually restores and maintains the image which he has now created since his mother's death, and is a man who actually can guide this nation through the many activities in which he is a master, like the environment and architecture and faith. He's very good on trying to blend in and mix and understand the different diversity in Britain. So I have got hope that he has learned his lessons.
What do you think are the pitfalls that he has to avoid?
Well, the problem with Charles is that he is impatient. He doesn't like contradiction. He doesn't like people telling him no. And I think that he has learnt that he's got to accept disagreement, and he's learnt that he's got to be somewhat majestic. I think that, he has a lot to contribute. This is a country which is somewhat directionless at the moment, has got lots of concerns about whether the country, and the society is going in the right direction. And he's a man of huge experience now. He's got wisdom. His great problem is that he is, while the monarchy is very popular still, nearly 70% of the population supports it, his own ratings are 54%, and he is a very minority amongst young people and the Asian and African communities. And that is something he's got to work hard to restore or rebuild.
And he doesn't just have to manage the business of the monarchy, does he? How will the king manage the family?
Well, it's going to be a challenge, but I think that Camilla will help him. I think that his relationship with William has clearly improved a lot, and he can rely a lot on William and Kate, who's a wonderful woman, to actually gather support amongst the young and the rest. But I thought Princess Anne's intervention this week was fascinating. You know, often forgets Anne, but Anne is the hardest working of the royal family. She's enormously popular. She's very, very sensible. She's very tough. I think that she's absolutely right that the monarchy is slimmed down enough now. The reparations issue is nonsense, but he's got to go along with it up to a point. And the job is for them to get on and serve the people, which the people love and want. They like their hospitals or schools or factories or whatever visited by the royal family, because the royal family is interested in them. They're not like politicians looking for votes. They're there to encourage people to serve and to be appreciated for all their hard work. And that's what they do terribly well. I mean, Charles's great quality is that he actually is interested in people. He's interested in issues. He's a master of many of the issues. And that's why in his recent visit to Germany, he was so applauded, because he's a serious man. He's a considerate man, passionate, he's emotional, but he's a man now with enormous experience of life. And that's something which cannot be underrated.
In Revenge, you wrote about a family torn apart that some might have thought was a bit strong, but it's only got worse, it seems.
Well, I think King Charles has played it badly. That's the problem. I don't think he realized the full nature of Meghan's vindictiveness and her poisonous attitude towards relationships. He should have looked at the way she's appallingly treated her father and her former friends. And I think he should have closed her down. He shouldn't have let them give their children titles and all the rest. And he is a father clearly with a conscience that somehow he hasn't helped Harry in his youth, which is probably true. But now I think it's for him to make it absolutely clear that the Montecito royals are cut off and have absolutely no role whatsoever in Britain, because frankly, Meghan doesn't want it. She wants the title, but she never intends to come back here. She was never going to come to the coronation. She wants to be a star in her own right. And you can't deal with narcissists like her and slightly unhappy people like Harry rationally. You've got to, in the end, impose what is in your own interest and the interest of the British royal family. And that is not pandering to the Sussexes.
Tom's latest book is entitled Revenge, Meghan, Harry and the War Between the Windsors. Dr Tessa Dunlop is a royal author and historian, and I asked her to compare 2023's event to the late Queen's in 1953.
In 1953, there was so much goodwill for Britain and for this feminine icon, which is really what she was, unimpeachable, blemish-free, in a golden carriage, in a downpour, and we'd saved all our pennies, waited 18 months, virtually, for an extraordinary spectacle. And the military parade that went with it chimed very much with the times. It was almost a sort of love letter to what Britain had done in the Second World War, what it had achieved. Ideas about empire hadn't yet curdled. They'd been quite effectively packaged into this new idea of Commonwealth, which was cast through the feminine prism of Queen Elizabeth. So it all worked rather wonderfully. And of course, the alchemy was the invention of television.
Yes.
Her appearing in our rooms, in our sitting rooms. If you scroll on 70 years, I mean, the level of social change, the political change, the emergence of identity politics, the way in which the symbol of monarchy is now as much perceived as for ill as for good, that makes it so challenging for Charles, irrespective of his personal standing, both in Britain and globally. And an economic crisis, a cost of living crisis, is slightly different from the economic strains of a war, where you can sort of see the end of. It was towards the end of rationing. There's this idea of hope, rebuilding a better Britain. And I don't think we're feeling quite as hopeful as we were in 1953 right now. And I think that impacts as well on this slightly flat build-up to the coronation.
So what do you suppose Charles is feeling about this? This is the role he's been waiting for his entire life. Well, there's probably a crass analogy, but it's almost like turning up to the bar as the alcohol runs dry. Is it?
Yes.
Does it have that sort of feel about it, do you think? Do you think he will feel that?
Only the wonderful thing, I'm told, because I'm not there yet, about being 74 is you care a bit less.
How can you not care about being the monarch of the country?
Well, I think he passionately cares. But you know, when you're young, everything really matters.
Yes.
You live things more vividly. You're more on edge and adrenalised. I think he's learnt by now, A, to be more comfortable in his skin, B, that a lot of what goes on in relation to him and the institution is out with his control. And those bits that are in his control, I mean, I think he's conducted himself commendably in the wake of his mother's death. I don't think we can have any real personal grudge against Charles right now. He seemingly hasn't really put a foot wrong, and it's been a fairly rocky ride. I mean, beyond the eggs and Harry, it's not easy being a man in his senior years carrying this much expectation.
But that is what I'm really failing to comprehend, is like how does he prepare for the unpreparable? How does he follow Queen Elizabeth?
I know that around Christmas time he was pretty anxious, and I don't know if that was the Harry fallout, but intel that I got was some days he was like, I don't even know which tie to wear. It was kind of a blitz of decisions that he was having to make, the buck stopping with him. I think that recently, when you look at his body language, I mean, that wonderful trip to Germany, he seems to have sat back on this new role.
I think that a lot of people will be asking, are we asking a lot of a couple in their 70s? My parents are their age. My parents are slowing down. These guys have to now step it up, ramp it up on the world stage. What must be going through their heads?
They're exhausted. You know, I've got a fractured ankle at the moment, Jo, and I did spare a thought.
You haven't mentioned it.
I just have now. And I'm hopping along, and nothing's quite the same. Anyone will tell you that over a certain age. But people will be taking great care of them. I think we need to remember that. They have got an extraordinary team around them.
Yes, and the royals before them have lived very long lives.
Yeah,
that's
great
true.
genes.
Yeah.
A wonderful gene pool. That's inherited too. But we can't pretend, Jo, that this is playing out. We keep on saying, I hear the British press, it's a global spectacle. Billions of people globally. And I'm like, I don't buy that. Actually, if you look at the number of press places that have been bought, if you look at the international press interest, it doesn't compare with the funeral. It's also hard for Charles. And one of the reasons, incidentally, that the Queen waited 18 months and that, say, Edward VII waited 18 months almost after his mother Victoria's death is to give a bit of breathing space from these giant funerals.
Yeah.
The Queen's funeral wasn't only imposed from above as a state funeral, but also it was organic. This living vision of a queue to go and look at her lying in state. There was something for everyone that was driven by the people. It was a democratic response to her death. And that's where I feel for Charles, because this is so quick off the back of the Queen's death, not even a year. It feels quite crowded, and it feels a bit like it's being imposed on us, not by him. These decisions don't lie with the King, because we know he doesn't have the power to make decisions on that level, ironically enough.
And the Queen was so young when she was crowned. She arguably had the time to be patient in that way.
Yeah, of
that
course.
Perhaps Charles doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound distasteful, but it's just a fact of age.
It is, and that is one of the problems. Is there's been this glut of royal events.
Your book was called Elizabeth and Philip,
Yeah.
so you know a great deal about how they were as a couple and how they were as monarchs. What do you think will be different about Charles and Camilla?
They're going to be caretaker monarchs. Elizabeth set the tone for post-war Britain. In many ways, the longevity of Philip and Elizabeth disguised Britain's slippage on the global stage. They were this incredible throwback to the Blitz, to Churchill. We could pretend we were carrying on as before. The idea of them as the nuclear family, all beneath this social change, the turbulence that, of course, Charles was whipped up in. He didn't seem to touch them.
Yeah.
They popped out the other side in the 21st century. And we still believe she was in everyone's granny, even when Harry says she never hugged me. You know, it was extraordinary, this kind of frozen aspic image we have of that couple, again making it harder for Charles. And there is, I think, his unique selling point. In a way that the Queen couldn't touch us because we never really got to know her. Charles touches us.
Yes.
We've seen him stumble and fall on a global stage. We've seen him make everyman mistakes. But we also know he understands the little man. He gets the unpopular cause.
Well, this is what interesting is, yes, I understand why you would say a caretaker monarch.
Yeah.
But he is interested in society, he is interested
Yeah.
in social change. He surely will be able to set some tone as his own monarch, as his own king.
And I think he has to an extent already, simply by virtue of what's gone before. And I think there's a bit of me, I remember speaking to veterans about 1953, and they were so moved by this young queen, younger than them. They prayed for her that night, their Elizabeth, along with mummy and daddy. Weirdly, I see Charles as more vulnerable, because the monarchy's become this symbol, this whipping boy that people are allowed to pin their grievances on, because he's an older man, and you
Yes.
feel the blows sometimes when you're older.
But also, you know, in the 50s, of course, I think there was probably just a lot more deference paid to the class
Yes,
system.
of course.
We don't have that anymore.
No, it's gloves off,
Yeah.
eggs out.
Yeah.
It's a very tough gig. But I think we know, even if you're an anti-monarchist, even if you say not my king, we know the guy's a decent bloke. Even Harry didn't really land a blow on his dad. Okay, he wasn't fully embracing the role of fatherhood. Who is? But the truth is, Charles is the milk of human kindness, as my grandmother would say, runs through Charles's veins. And I think we've had 70 years to get to know that, and I think it matters as our head of state.
Dr Tessa Dunlop's book, Elizabeth and Philip, A Story of Young Love, Marriage and Monarchy, is out in paperback now. It's montage time, and if you missed yesterday's, make sure that you go back and check it out. But if you didn't, here is part 2 of our look back at the man we now call King Charles III. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. In tomorrow's special show, we'll have more images of the King, and we'll bring Richard and Rebecca back to hear about their coronation experiences. You will not want to miss it. My thanks to all our guests. Check out their books in the links below, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.